Hey there, I'm Joe Weems. Before we get into the video, I want to remind you about ng-conf 2023 happening in Salt Lake City, Utah on June 14th and 15th. Head over to ng-conf.org to check out the speakers, check out the talks, and to get your ticket before they all sell out. We'll see you there.
Is everyone having fun? Well, welcome. Did everybody have to negotiate with their family members to come here or with their bosses? Yes? I certainly had to. My children asked me where I was going, and I'm like, to a business trip? What's a business trip, Mom? My 6-year-old asked me. I'm like, well, it's a magical country where parents go to have fun. I don't know, hopefully we'll have some fun, right? So communication solves a lot of problems, and having a good state management is important in our everyday software development and web application development. So after this talk, hopefully you will start using good state management library, or you will just hear a story about your good friend. But before we get started, let's play a quick game. It's called Anti-Fletus Gluteus Maximus. Everybody please stand up. Did you get that Greek? No? All right, so we are just going to do a little survey. Thank you so much. And before I continue, I do have to take a picture because they're not going to believe me I did this in front of so many people. So just wave to me and say hi. Awesome, thank you so much. Don't sit down. So we're going to do a little survey, like I said. So those of you who live solo or with just one partner, sit down because you get an award for a Freedom Award. The rest of you keep standing, so now we're gonna just look around just to see the numbers. And so now everybody who has 3 people in their household, please sit down. Okay, good. Everybody under 4 or less, please sit down. Oh, I love this. All right. I want to keep the rest of the heroes up because I would be standing too. Alex, good for you. So guys, look around and look at these people with big households. Me included, I would be standing with you. I was going to say we're the most organized people in the world, but let me tell you something. I lost my laptop at TSA coming to the conference. So what we are really are problem solvers. Give a round of applause to everyone standing. Problem solvers. Good job. Sit down. Thank you so much for participating. That was a quick game. I hope you enjoyed it. So now about me, I work for the best consulting company in the world, Hero Devs. I come from backend and full stack development and transferred over into Angular and front-end development maybe 6 years ago. As I said before, I'm a person of a big household. I'm a mother of 5 children. So now what comes with that is a challenge of managing the households. Everybody who were standing last know. And so how do we manage our software development? And some of the hard truths are the flow control. We must maintain the order of execution when we create our web application with Angular. So one of my favorite components to implement is TypeScript. And so when we write TypeScript, user is entering data into the box, and we definitely don't want to overwhelm the APIs with the data coming in. And kind of the same in the household, right? You want to make sure that there's only 1 or 2 people in charge. You don't want everybody to kind of be all running the household. I don't know, some of your kids maybe are, not mine. Can't handle that. So the communication is another problem in software development and in web application development. And we need to propagate the data throughout application in the proper way. Also, our logic must be executed in one way or one order. Sharing state is the next big problem with the large application, because with small applications, we kind of know how to do this, but the bigger it gets, the harder it gets. And reactivity. Actually, I did have a small insert on the reactivity, and then Angular team spoke about what they want to do with change detection, and I'm like, all right, zoneless Angular, state management library might be doing that. We don't always have to use zone. Okay, the next thing was on the list, per component change detection, check. Stores for state management, well, we're talking about state management, so we got that. Computed properties, isn't that selectors? I think so. All right, so as we move through picking a state management library, we want to make sure we have solid architecture, clean code, and we're able to support and maintain our application. So what is solid architecture? We want to achieve event-driven, which is already part of Angular. We do have our ngrx already built into it. We move on to creating container presenter setup for our components. If you're not familiar with that, is that you have heard the terms smart and dumb components. So, and then we organize our code as best as possible, the same way we do our households, right? We want to make sure our children are fed and clothed and they go to school or learn at home, whatever you choose. So the next thing is clean code. So as your code base is growing, you basically encounter a problem that there's so many data changes, your components must react to those data changes. So you trying to figure out how you're going to contain that state. And you Google it and you find out service with the subject is a thing. So you implement that. Sorry. And one other trick I've heard is adding a facade to your application, which I've done before because I was working on a project where I couldn't convince the management to go with ngrx. And sure enough, after a while, I did convince them to add ngrx, and we kind of plugged things through the facade service. That was kind of fun. Not everybody's loving it, but those are part of the growing pains. And sometimes when you're building a household, you do end up buying a house for the hopes of filling all the rooms. And sometimes you run out of the rooms, right? I certainly did. They don't like bunk beds. All right, support and maintainability. So we love greenfield projects, right? Like for our consulting company, we do a lot of Angular JS to Angular conversions, right? And those are fun, and we come in and we architect it, and we can choose the library, but how do you really choose the library? Do you really want to write something from scratch? For us, it's easy for us to convince our clients to pick a library that has good community support, lots of learning material, and I just have to give a shout out to our ngrx team. I see Alex over there, Brandon somewhere in the room, Mike, and there was a talk already on ngrx, but I just want to say thank you for saving me sometimes when I'm writing code and I know I'm not doing it right, and you guys answer my tweets. I appreciate it. And so how do we do on time? All right, big decisions. So will our library that we choose have a single source of truth? And it's basically our application data. Will it have a centralized aggregated point of reference to our data? A unidirectional data flow we kind of already talked about within the other talks. It's basically one way of data flowing through Angular, and Angular does allow us to break that mechanism because there is a bidirectional data flow within Angular, but unidirectional data flow just gives you more control, and dries do not repeat yourself, and hopefully with my favorite state management, we can achieve all of that. So for us, the choice is ngrx. Say hello to ngrx. And the main component of ngrx is a store, and it is a global state management for Angular. And we are just going to go through the pieces of Angular. It is inspired by Redux. Here's a little quote about Redux, and also there is a picture. Everybody who is familiar with Redux have seen this, but there is this loop, and I want to demonstrate it when I show you the code, how it kind of closes together with ngrx. So what are the building blocks of ngrx? We're going to the dark side now. All right, so I was trying to come up with an acronym, so if you don't remember all of the pieces of ngrx, it's okay. But here's one, store, erase. I don't know. Let's try that. All right, so here's the 4 pieces I'm going to talk about: actions, reducers, selectors, and effects. Although effects is not part of ngrx store, I will still try to run through that really quick. So first is actions, and actions are just JavaScript objects, and they do describe unique events. And here's an example of an action. So what the events within application, user interaction, network requests, device API calls, and so forth. And it's basically me talking to my kids. Please do this. Please do that. Mom, where's my homework? Where's my bag? All those are kind of events, right, within our life. All right, so here we have a name for our action. Here is the function that is provided with ngrx. It's called createAction, and it has 2 parameters. And I wanted to talk about these just because when I started with ngrx and JavaScript in that matter, I didn't know what I was looking at, and I could get lost with parentheses. So I just wanted to tell you how I dissect it. So the first parameter is a type of the event. It's just a string, and you can name it anything you want. And it's going to be our unique event. The second one is a function call. You can see there's an open and close parenthesis at the end. And you are specifying an object that it's going to be certainly typed to your action object. So that's what the props function does. It will give you an object, a property for your action object. Okay? So this is just a property on your action. It's URL type of string. All right, here's an example of calling the same action with just a string, which is the first parameter, and it is required. All right, so how do we test our actions? Do we test our actions? Yes, no? No, I don't. Next. All right, so now we talk about reducers. So the reducers are pure functions, and they change the state after action is dispatched. Okay, and I just wanted to quickly explain what a pure function is, although there was a definition of it, but let me just give you an example, a real-life example. So let's say you have to make a cake, but you don't want to make a cake, so you buy a box. And there are 3 ingredients: water, eggs, and milk. And the function is to bake a cake, but first you have to mix. So your function is mix your cake mix. So if you follow the recipe, the same kind of batter will always come out. That's your pure function. Baking a cake is a different story because you're using a person who's baking a cake. You're using an oven, which is going to burn your cake. In my case, I don't bake, I don't know. So that's basically what a pure function is. So let's just go through this code. Here you see there is a helper function called createReducer. Same thing, there was a name in front of it, root reducer. The initial state is what you want your application to have when you get it started. It's just another object that you create before you call the createReducer. There are a couple of other functions called on, and they take the action that was emitted, and there is a state that is changed with different, already talked about this, and different properties are changed. So this is pretty simple property changes reducer, right? And so I want to just quickly go over how do we test our reducers. I kind of go and ask myself, how complex is that code that I just showed you? And it's not very complex, so I'm not going to test it. No, because I know ngrx team is doing a wonderful job testing in their library. If I am doing some kind of modifications with my data, setting some flags, or I just don't trust people coming on board later on, then I'll write tests. All right, so next thing is selectors. So selectors are also pure functions, and they're used to obtain, derive, and select pieces of state. And here's a code snippet for a selector. So here I'm just creating an interface for description of my state. Later on, it's the name of the selector, and that's what you would be using to select from store. It does take a parameter of the state, and here we're kind of taking just the user from the state. So that's not a very complex selector, but you just want a user, you do this. All right, so in the component TS file, you are going to create an observable variable with a $sign on it and assign it to a store.select, and you would put your selector into the parentheses. And that would allow you to create a reactive application, because then you can set your unpush detection, your change detection to unpush, because you are basically subscribing to that observable in the template. All right, so the power of selectors, I'm just going to say that they are observable, like I showed you in the previous slide. There are memoized and composable. So the composable means you can take multiple selectors and create a different kind of state. So if you need to calculate something from the state, you would use selectors, but let me quickly tell you what memoized is. It took me a while to figure out. Imagining me walking back from school with my two kids, they're elementary age, and my son likes to ask a lot of questions, and he goes, Mom, what? Mom, and then there's like 4 more moms. And then again, Mom, I have a snake, can I bring it home? That means, that's what memoize. You ignore the repeats, but then if something changes, then you get updated, okay? Thank you for that. Again, I don't test my selectors, but they are great to mock for testing, very easy. They're just, there are helper functions for that, just look it up. All right, so what about back-end data? And that's why I told you I'm going to talk about effects, just because I haven't used ngrx without effects. It is a separate library, but there wasn't one project in my Angular career that I didn't use effects in the project. So it's just a class, and what effects are that they use streams of actions, and they call other processes like API calls, basically external interaction, like API services, and they dispatch another action. So I'll go line by line, just kind of explain this, but how that happens. But they do decrease the complexity of your components and your services. Remember we talked about service with the subject or facade, that's all gone. That's all going to be here. So that's, like I said, this is a class. In the constructor, we do inject actions and whatever other services, outside services that we need to execute. We are reacting to an action, a specific action. There are many, many things you can do with effects. I'm just giving you a simple example, like the bottom level of it. So off type is it's a function that returns a stream, and then in this example, we're doing a switch map, and we call a login service, and then again, we pipe the data, the observable data that comes from login, and we have 2 scenarios. The first one is a map, and the success, and the second one is if our login fails for some reason. Then, so on the first, on success, we fire the user success action, and on failure, it's going to be user failure, and we're going to set the errors. So now we come full circle. We fired our new action, and we're back into the reducer. So we've come full circle into the state management. And the next slide is how do we test ngrx. And here I just wanted to say there is a really great blog on Hero Dev's blog about testing ngrx effects. Kudos to Edward. Please take a picture. Good job, Edward. And it has changed the way I write tests. I mean, it's amazing, and the people I work with. Thank you. All right, and so it's not about picking up a library, it's about managing state, right? We are really not in the business of like judging here, we just want to get our jobs done. And having ngrx in my toolbox definitely has changed my career in Angular, coming from like the API world and C# and everything, and then picking that up is going to change yours if you choose to do it. But other things that are cool about ngrx are there is a router store, there is an entity library, component store. By the way, component store, I was lucky enough to be on a workshop when it was just in the baby stage. That was so cool, just to see those guys create cool things. Store DevTools is an amazing debugging tool. If you need or have any questions about it, I just love this, and I use it every day, basically. There's also schematics and ESLint plugin. And yeah, so go and learn ngrx if you want to. Thank you.